Russia is a strange place. It's a far-right dictatorship fighting against fascism. It's a wannabe empire opposed to imperialism. It liberates Russian speakers by blowing them up. It's a country that produces nuclear warheads and fifth-generation aircraft, allegedly, while much of its population does not have access to indoor plumbing. If not toilets or running water, the Russian state does excel in one thing: propaganda. Now, we're all familiar with RT, Sputnik, Russian troll farms and Viktor Orban. But far fewer people know about the Russian state-sponsored pulp fiction industry. A massive component of the Russian propaganda machine aimed exclusively at a domestic audience. It helps explain why the Russian public is still lukewarm about the war in Ukraine even after 2 years, in spite of all the death, destruction and daily Russian war crimes. One thing to note about the Russian government pulp fiction industry, it's quite the term, isn't it, is that its scale defies common sense. It started picking up in the early 2010s, and since then more than 2,500 books have been published. That's about one book published every 36 hours for the past decade. These books are like a contagion. They can be found everywhere in Russia, from the smallest kiosks to the Moscow Central Bookstore. They are in fact more common within Russia than indoor toilets, thanks to the massive centralized effort by the government to spread them absolutely everywhere. So what are all these books about? I want to talk about two main types. One is the so-called Battle Fantastic series, which is basically about the modern Russian army dominating every possible opponent in every possible conflict. Russia is great, our enemies are weak and pathetic, but also a mortal threat at the same time. Go Russia! The other type is called Popadanci, which roughly translates to people who appear suddenly. They are time-traveling alternative history books. Now, if you ever come across the term alt history online, you know you're in for some weapons-grade autism. These books are really no different, except they have the full support of the Russian state, and the stories are written from a pro-Russian, revanchist perspective approved by a government agency. So how do we get from this graphical masterpiece to dude in an AKM shirt pointing a pistol at a 19th century British colonial trooper to Stalin becoming Darth Vader's Sith apprentice? Well, get your deep diving suit ready, because we are about to immerse ourselves in the world of Russian state-sponsored pulp fiction. The Battle Fantastic series is the tip of our proverbial iceberg. It features classic themes such as Russia fights the evil Ukrainian Nazis, 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 oh, and also Russia fights the evil Georgians, who are probably also Nazis. This notion of everyone we don't like are Nazis and fascists largely comes from their great patriotic war national myth, where Russia heroically fought and won against Nazism and fascism, thereby saving the civilized world from the likes of Hitler. Except, we'll get to that later. In the Russian context, the terms Nazi or fascist have completely lost their original meaning. Nowadays, both terms simply refer to anyone opposing Russian geopolitical interests. What's that? Georgia and Ukraine are seeking closer ties to the West? Wow, sounds like a bunch of fascist Nazism to me, comrade. Let's go liberate the Russian-speaking population by blowing them up. Now, most of these books were published before the war in Ukraine. Looking back, their themes were repeated by official Russian propaganda nearly word for word in order to justify their invasion. They spent years and years manufacturing consent at home, so the domestic population will accept their justifications without questioning them. There is even a book about a soldier who for some reason looks like Sergei Shoigu, the former Russian defense minister, who travels back to 1944 with a GRU squad to kill or capture the Ukrainian leadership, who look like present-day Ukrainian politicians for some reason. The Battle Fantastic series is an effort by the Russian government to militarize popular literature and with that whip the population into a pro-war frenzy. Want to pick up some of them from Moscow's Central Bookstore? Why not grab some mock Russian military equipment in the process? It's right there, next to the fiction section. Of course, this manufactured consent is also present in the West, only in more subtle ways. Think of the creative phrasing some news outlets apply, for example when comparing Ukraine and Palestine-related headlines. Thankfully, Ground News is here to help you navigate through the media landscape. It's a news aggregator website that collects articles from around the world so you can compare how different sources report on the same story. It gives you important context about a news source's political bias, reliability, and ownership structure, among others, which is very important information when judging a news story's veracity. Let's take a story about a recent event. According to Ground News, this story was covered by 133 news sources so far, with a bias distribution leaning towards the left. The bias comparison feature tells us that the left emphasizes US rejection of election results, the center focuses on neighboring countries' reactions, and the right relies more on emotional appeals. Ground News even has a blind spot page where you can find news stories that have little to no coverage from one side of the political spectrum. Ground News is a powerful information tool helping you navigate the news information landscape, enabling you to stay on top of the news cycle. I can only recommend it. Go to ground.news/Adam or scan this QR code to receive 40% off their Vantage plan, which includes unlimited access to every feature. Or you can try their Pro plan for just $1 a month for great value. By subscribing to Ground News, you're not only supporting me in making more content for you, but also an independent platform making the media landscape more transparent. Thank you for checking out Ground News. The next level of Russian state pulp fiction is books set in the 19th century, involving Russian czars. Here we start delving into the popadancy or time traveler books. Oh boy. In this particular book, Tsar from the Future, a guy from today's Russia wakes up in the body of Nicholas II, prevents the Russian Revolution, defeats Great Britain, because of course he does, and then casually conquers Istanbul with modern weapons. Why Istanbul? Because that's the seat of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, the Russian Vatican basically. So in just one book, this guy defeats Russia's #1 archenemy, Britain, saves the Russian Empire, makes it a global power, and then basically conquers the Ottoman Empire. These books have zero chill. In another book, Rise Up Russians, this time two time travelers wake up in the bodies of Nicholas II and also his predecessor, Alexander III. The long-awaited sequel to best-selling Save Russia, a new journey into the past. Our contemporary, having taken possession of the body of Nicholas II, rewrites history in our favor. To help him, from the present day, other popadancy arrive, under whose leadership the Russian Empire makes an incredible leap into the future. Industries developing by leaps and bounds. Grand Dukes race around St. Petersburg in cars assembled in Nizhny Novgorod. The Russian army and navy are actively mastering radio communication. The construction of the Trans-Siberian Railway is in full swing. Soon the temporary blitzkrieg begins to stall. Nikola Tesla, whom the landing party from the future invited to Russia, goes missing. The Russo-Japanese War begins 15 years ahead of schedule. Powerful external forces that do not want the prosperity and greatness of Russia in every possible way slow down its rapid development, trying to return history to its former rails. Who will win this struggle? Russian popadancy or our enemies? Will it be possible to overcome the inertia of time? Will Russia have a bright past? Man, these things are like National Victim Complex, the book series. I guess one way of not dealing with the trauma is to write books fantasizing about going back in time and fixing it all. If only you could just go back to being 7 years old with your current knowledge and experience and that sort of stuff. Other than the bizarre time traveling stuff, there is also a bizarre amount of books dedicated to the complete destruction of Britain. Yeah, so you might have noticed Russian propaganda has a thing about Britain. They use the term Anglo-Saxon a lot to refer to their enemies. That's because they consider the US and the UK enemy #1 and #2 respectively. And since the US originated from the Anglo-Saxon sphere of the British Empire, you get the idea. Pictured here is a time-traveling Spetsnaz team taking over the HMS Victory and capturing Admiral Nelson. So in Russian thought, if you could just go back in time and destroy the British Empire, then the US would not exist as we know it, giving Russia free reign to rule the world hand in hand with Nazi Germany. Wait, what? Oh yeah, welcome to the next level of Russian state pulp fiction. The Hitler stuff. During World War II, Nazis and Soviets famously tried striking an accord with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. It was a non-aggression pact governing the relationship between Soviets and Nazi Germany. It famously broke down when Hitler attacked the Soviets. But few people know that there was a second, parallel attempt at an agreement, the German-Soviet talks, where the Soviet Union officially petitioned to become the fourth Axis power next to Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Imperial Japan. These talks also broke down, however, after Stalin was overly aggressive with his proposals and demands. But an actual agreement was already within reach at that point. The Soviets were this close to becoming the fourth Axis power. If you think this contradicts the great patriotic war myth of Russia being the great bulwark against fascists and Nazis, you're right. The fact that they actively tried to join them a year before kinda ruins the narrative. The most notorious books in the Hitler pulp fiction subgenre belong to the Comrade Hitler series. Russian Popadanets time traveler in the body of Adolf Hitler. Will he succeed in defeating England by carrying out Operation Sea Lion, an invasion of the British Isles? Will he dare to lead a military coup to remove the Nazi party from power and destroy the SS? Will Comrade Führer be able to prevent a clash with Stalin, preventing a suicidal German war against the USSR? Oh, how progressive. They actually want to get rid of the Nazis. Well, not really. In official Russian state canon, the only reason they hate Hitler and the Nazi party is because they attacked Russia. So when the writer has the heroic time traveler get rid of the Nazi party, it's not because of some principled action opposing the far right, but because they were the mean people who attacked Russia. In the real world, following the destruction of Nazi Germany, Stalin continued ethnic cleansings, putting gay people into camps, and otherwise the Soviet Union carried on with its rich history of anti-Semitism. Still, at least the Popadanets in this book gets rid of the Nazi party. Oh, but wait, there is another part. Comrade Hitler, Book 2. Hang Churchill. Our Popadanets, transferred into the body of Adolf Hitler, changes the history of the Second World War. What price will have to be paid for the invasion of Britain? Will Churchill be hanged as a warmonger for crimes against humanity? Will the Reich's alliance with Stalin's USSR come to fruition? Will Comrade Hitler, together with with comrade Stalin be able to defeat the US and build the atomic bomb before the Americans. Holy fucking... Okay, this is a bit more explicit. I guess the whole getting rid of the SS in the previous book didn't resonate with Russian audiences. This is why you should never believe tankies when they tell you, oh, Stalin didn't want an alliance with Hitler, he was going to heroically fight Nazism all along, he was just pretending. No, he fucking wasn't. In fact, as illustrated by the disturbing amount of Nazi-Soviet friendship-themed pulp fiction, many Russians would be ready to do so even today. Oh right, there's this gem as well. Assault for the Future, very subtle cover art of a modern Russian soldier palling around with a Nazi soldier, London and a burning Sherman tank in the background. It's always the fucking Brits, man. This book is also on the progressive side, where Hitler gets assassinated, there is an anti-fascist coup in Berlin, after which the Wehrmacht immediately joins the Soviets, and then Stalin nukes the US and institutes a global Soviet world order. Great. These books are the apex of government-mandated cope. It's the loser incel guy under the shower thinking about all the ways he could have gotten Stacy for himself if that dumbass Chad didn't steal her away. It's that kind of cringy, daydreaming power fantasy, except it's done by the Russian state. Oh, this one's fun. A pilot from Novorossiya, that's the region Russia initially took from Ukraine in 2014, travels back in time and finds himself in the body of Stalin's son, who's also a pilot. His modern Russian jet and apparently smartphone are also there for some reason. So he goes to win the war with future technology and exposes Nikita Khrushchev, Stalin's successor, as a traitor and a Western double agent. Just so everyone is aware, Khrushchev was the one who ended Stalin's reign of terror. He presided over the period called the Thaw, where previously brutal repressions eased, censorship was relaxed, and Stalin's ethnic cleansings and deportations generally came to an end. This was Khrushchev's legacy. He ended Stalin's totalitarian terror state, and for this, he gets labeled a Western plant and traitor by contemporary official Russian propaganda. The modern Russian government has been making a massive effort to rehabilitate and repopularize Stalin. And so in this book and many others, the protagonists explicitly set out to save Stalinism. But see, we're not asking the right questions here. Instead of why Stalinism, we should ask why not Stalinism in space. Enter the final level, rock bottom, Red Padawan. In the year 1941, Darth Vader ends up at Earth for some fucking reason on board of a Star Destroyer. Noticing there is a war going on, Vader allies with Stalin and helps him win World War II. Vader's support, however, comes at the cost of Stalin's submission to him, but Stalin manages to overpower and defeat Darth Vader, then takes control of the Empire and destroys America. The book ends with the following line: Stalin liked his new Star Destroyer. Far below him, on the surface of the planet, burned the ruins of Washington. At least Ukrainians commemorated poor Vader when they turned a Lenin statue into him. That actually happened. And this is the kind of shit the Russian public has been bombarded with for more than a decade now. And sure, many of these books are stupid and or ridiculous, but if you get subjected to this shit constantly, around the clock for more than 10 years, then eventually it just becomes the new normal. Not the time traveling or the Stalin defeating Darth Vader stuff, but the story's undertone. Russia is the greatest, Stalin was a great leader, Ukraine is run by fascist, pro-LGBT Nazis, the West is degenerate and wants us dead, and our nation's historical greatness was stolen by malicious outside actors. This gradual propagandizing and subtle brainwashing is why we see such incomprehensible ideological Gordian knot clusterfucks such as the Russian flag, the Soviet flag, and the Russian imperial flag flown right next to each other on giant flagpoles in the harbor of St. Petersburg. Three distinct forms of Russia whose values should be diametrically opposed to each other: the capitalist and democratic Russian Federation, the anti-capitalist, anti-monarchy, and anti-imperialist Soviet Union, and the very much imperialist and very much run by a monarch Russian Empire. How does all this compute? It doesn't. It's not meant to. It never meant to. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters except the greatness of the Russian nation. Ideals of socialism, communism, capitalism, democracy, they're all just meaningless sugarcoating on millennium-old Russian imperial ideals. Subjugation of neighbors, consolidation of wealth and power in the hands of a ruling elite, purging or forcibly Russifying all non-Russian ethnic groups, and the murder and deportation of those who disagree. And this mountain of written slop aimed at a domestic Russian audience is just one small component of this imperial insanity. The only thing that ever mattered to the Russian elite, regardless of what they called their country at the time or what ideology they pretended to champion. And these books, especially since 2010, were a shining example of the Russian elite's true intentions. How come they got ignored by the West? Sergei Sumlemny, an Eastern Europe expert from Germany, also asked this question. After all these examples of Russian state-run preparation for a global war, militarization of people, spreading all possible weird violence fantasies, one may ask a question. How the hell did Western embassies ignore this? It was so obvious, right? It was not hidden hidden at all. Revanchist books were sold everywhere, revanchist movies were blockbusters, they literally formed Russian culture after the 1990s. Literally nothing was hidden. My take is, it was a dangerous mixture of ignorance, Russia fascination, laziness and corruption. One need indeed to have a special mood to dig into local culture while working abroad. You know, learn the language, know cultural codes, read a lot of shit like these books. Many of those who went to Russia read Dostoevsky and believed they knew Russia. Instead, they had to spend a couple of years on LiveJournal and read Krylov, Holmogorov, Galkovsky, Kenny Tiger, Legatus_Minor, ever heard, huh? And others to understand what's going on. Warning signs were ignored because they spoiled the whole picture of economic cooperation and Wandel durch Handel. Some shitty books? We have them too, they said. Yes, but not of this number, concentrated focus on one topic and the level of hate. Warnings like this were ignored as nerdy, too detailed, focusing on abnormalities and missing the global perspective, over-exaggerating, or even Russophobic. I have experienced all such reactions. Maybe the very idea that a nation in the 21st century, which has got all possible cooperation offers, G8, G20, NATO-Russia Council, Partnership for Peace, World Trade Organization, etc., can willingly and gladly choose a path of war was too scary for too many. At the end of this video, there are two more books I'd like to show you briefly. Think of this as the bonus round. You think you're ready, but you're not. Exhibit A, Red Lord. Stalin, after his death, awakens in a fantasy world, adopts the Red Lord moniker, and turns that world's great magical war into a great patriotic war. I know, I have no idea either. I genuinely don't know what I can add here. And Exhibit B, the Tank Driver of Mordor. A Tank Academy cadet gets transported to Middle-earth by a wizard with his tank, so the cadet can help Sauron win. I mean, is anyone even remotely surprised at this point? He agrees to this because apparently Mordor is a model of statehood for all of Middle-earth. We represent ideal organization and order. Wherever we come to power, we put an end to the arbitrary rule of little people who imagine themselves kings. Yes, sometimes our methods are harsh, but you can't plant wheat without pulling up a few weeds, can you? Unified power and unified order are the ideals of Mordor. We have brought the light of truth to the Far East and South. But the West? Apparently this is an actual quote from one of the characters. Oh, and apparently orcs are genetically inferior or something, so the tanker cadet gets recruited into the Mordor eugenics program, where he gets to have sex with orc women to produce a stronger orc breed. Okay, I admit this is a pretty creative spin on the Uruk-hai. Someone had to approve this story at a Russian government agency. I don't know, man. Yeah, well, I guess this is the end of the video. Thank you for watching. Russian orc eugenics. Jesus fucking Christ.